Those first 4 questions for the Mentimeter. So let's get started with introductions. My name is Beck Bailey. My pronouns are he and him. I am director of HRC's Workplace Equality Program, or as many of you know us as the CEI people. Our team has the great pleasure of putting forth the Corporate Equality Index survey every year and working with all of you and many others across the Fortune 1000 and the American Law 200 in benchmarking their LGBTQ inclusive practices. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Raina.
Thanks, Beck. Hi, everyone. I'm Raina Nelson. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the manager for the Workplace Equality Program, or the Corporate Equality Index. And I've been with the organization for about a year and really excited for you all to hear us today. I'll pass it along to Alon and Chad, our guest today.
Thanks, Raina. Alon Meislich here from Accenture. My day job with Accenture is in technology consulting and technology strategy, but my nights, weekends, and all other hours job is leading our US Pride ERG. And in that capacity, I'm a contributor today to the CEI. I was joking with Beck the other day that originally I was about an 80% contributor to the CEI, and now just after many years of maturity, I'm down to about 10%, which I particularly enjoy. So I'm a contributor and I'm part of our process from an ERG standpoint. And thank you to Beck, thank you to Raina and HRC for having me today, and to everyone in the audience. I hope you're enjoying Out and Equal so far. John?
And hi, everyone. My name is Chad Schwartz. I use the pronouns he, him. I am with Alex Partners, where I've been with the firm for about 8 years. I am based in St. Louis. The bulk of my career has been centered around litigation consulting, but the last 3 years I've been part of our D&I team at Alex Partners, where I help to oversee our 8 amazing employee resource groups. Whether I knew it or not at the time, when I started my involvement with the Corporate Equality Index, it really did help my career trajectory, switching from legal consulting into D&I. Something I just realized as I was thinking about this. But I was also the co-founder of our Pride Matters ERG, and I'm part of our HRC CEI committee. I was a part of our original committee that analyzed the Corporate Equality Index to see if it was something that we were going to participate in, and sought out buy-in from senior leaders and stakeholders. And I'm also the proud dad of an amazing 20-month-old.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to Alon and Chad for joining us. It's always good to have kind of a business-to-business voice when we talk about the efforts that we're doing around diversity and inclusion, and in this case, around the CEI process. Let's, since we've introduced ourselves, let's take a little look at some of the Mentimeter questions and get a sense of who's in the room here with us from your side. And let's take a look first at the companies represented. Coming in now, we see many of our friends across the current CEI landscape. And we also see some new companies in here. So thank you to the new folks for joining us. Might be folks who haven't participated yet and are getting a little bit more familiar with the CEI. So thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at score breakdowns. And we can see here a large percentage of CEI 100s, possibly very mature in the efforts around the LGBTQ inclusive workplace policies and practices. A few folks who aren't sure of their company's score, and I think that could mean a couple of things. Perhaps the company doesn't participate yet, or they're not sure if the company does. Perhaps they know the company participates, but they haven't looked it up lately. But definitely some newcomers to the group, so thanks to our newcomers. And then we have a few folks here who have a few little gaps to close in the CEI, and this is a great session for you to be in on to ask your questions around how to address moving from 85 to 100, or moving from 95 to 100. So thank you all for joining us. We still see some numbers coming in now. Just want to make sure folks have a chance. Keep populating those Menti chats up to slide 4, and you'll see a pause slide when you've gotten through the first group. Let's take a look at the next question, shall we? What is your role around the CEI? Again, numbers coming in here. We've got some official submitters and contributors. Those are folks who actually fill it out in the interface and are kind of the record names on file as having submitted the CEI. Lots of ERG, BRG, affinity group members who assist with the CEI. And that's a really common role to perhaps be responsible for sharing out to the official submitters and contributors the efforts that the ERG has undertaken to support the Corporate Equality Index criteria. Some folks here who are probably members of their employee resource groups or business resource groups who don't work directly on the CEI, but are very interested in the process and its results. And so a lot of you in that role as well. We see a few other roles, perhaps people who work in other parts of the business and offer assistance to the CEI. Here's a little fun fact for those of you who are new, and maybe folks who have only a small window of the CEI. It really usually does take a very large cross-functional team to complete all the sections of the CEI, because some of them focus on HR policy and practice. Some of them focus on the activities of the employee resource group or business resource group. And some of them even touch into philanthropy, recruitment, different areas of talent management. And because of this, often need a very cross-functional team to work on the actual survey itself. So it's not surprising to see people from many, many aspects of the business in the CEI. And in fact, I'll even note that for many companies, the last step is a legal review, and the GC's office sometimes is involved as well. So let's get a little bit of an idea about what you're hoping for from today's section. Definitely learning how to close some gaps, get ideas for areas of opportunity. Folks who are perhaps new, want to learn a little bit more about it in general. Learn about what's coming next. There might be some folks who are wondering what criteria might change. And here's something, sharing the feedback on the CEI. We welcome your feedback. We welcome your feedback on improving the process. So we're going to have an opportunity to do that. And for those of you who are in that something else category, don't worry, we have an open Q&A function coming down the road. I will note that we're using this Mentimeter to manage our Q&A. So please use the Menti to pop those questions in. We'll try and keep an eye on the Pathable as well, but if you could do us a favor and focus on Menti, that would be really helpful. Okay, we've hit the end of our first 4 questions, so folks can pause on the Mentimeter while I turn it over to my colleague Raina, and they're gonna take us through some housekeeping on the CEI. Raina?
Yeah, thank you so much, Beck. So first, I just want to go over the current 2021 Corporate Equality Index timeline. So quick kind of review for folks. The survey launched this year in June. And surveys were due, both our full survey and our short form recertification in September and August respectively. And right now we're going through the process of reviewing surveys and looking at each survey individually. And we will be following up in the coming weeks and hopefully getting out preliminary scores in mid-November, November 13th. Again, if we have any questions, we will reach out earlier, but you'll have time to respond either way if you see your score and you have any questions about that. Shortly after we send out our preliminary scores, we'll also be letting folks know about final scores ahead of the report release. So in December and January, we'll be analyzing the data, crunching the numbers, writing the report, and getting ready for things like press and the press kit that we put out every year. If we go and then, after that, the 3rd and 4th week of January is what we're looking at for the report release, but we don't have a specific date at the moment, but we will keep folks abreast of when we're hoping to have that out in January 2021. So next, we'll talk a little bit about our kind of preliminary timeline for the 2022 Corporate Equality Index. We're hoping to follow mostly the same timeline, maybe launching a little bit earlier in spring of 2021 with the survey due in the summer, following up in the fall and having the report released in January 2022. But, I know there are a lot of folks on here who haven't started the CEI yet or haven't been involved. Please feel free to reach out to us at cei@hrc.org. You can request time to talk to us by phone or by Zoom, but we also reply to every single email. Initially, if you have any questions that won't be covered in this session, because we're going to be looking pretty broadly about the CEI, feel free to reach out to us again at cei@hrc.org. We're happy to answer your questions or have a quick call. With that kind of housekeeping done, I'll pass it back over to Beck to take us forward.
Thanks, Raina. Folks on the line, I know there seems to be some challenge with the Zoom password, so let's see if we can get you access that way. One moment. And apologies, just making sure we get everybody all the information. And it looks like the password, I just chatted it out. I'm going to chat it out again just so everybody has it. Okay. Thank you for bearing with us on that little bit of tech bubble. Okay, so our first question up in the Menti, we wanted to ask you about some of your challenges in your diversity and inclusion efforts this year, whether it was around the CEI specifically or in your diversity and inclusion efforts more broadly. We see a lot around certainly the pandemic and COVID-19, being virtual, being remote, trying to manage Zoom fatigue and engagement in that space. I'd love to ask our guests, Alon and Chad, about your challenges and how you've approached some of those. Do you all want to share? How about you, Alon?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And a lot of the same here. I think we're all struggling with similar challenges, particularly in the US, but also around the world. The one nuance I would add too is there was a particularly difficult time of year for us in terms of, and just context in the US around racial injustice that required a lot more of our community to come together. And so I think the complications of COVID-19 and virtual ways of working made it an extra challenging time for us at Accenture to think about how we talked about intersectionality, how we brought together our diverse communities and segments within our LGBTQ pride community, but also our peer ERGs and especially folks with ethnic diversity in African American and Black communities. And all of this happening as we were gearing up and going into Pride. And so I think for us, our challenge was how do we as a Pride community react respectfully and become allies for the Black and African American community while still celebrating and to some degree using the platform of June and Pride Month to do that all the more powerfully. And so that was the challenge I think we faced. And I think extending that further beyond June and Pride Month, it's also been an opportunity for us to try and, again, solve some of these virtual ways of working, the fatigue of working virtually and bringing our communities together and having causes and challenges to rally around, and support was an opportunity to bring people together as a little bit of a way to address some of those challenges.
Yeah, and I would really just build off a lot of what Alana's saying. I mean, I think, you know, and I'm looking at a lot of the responses coming in, and I'm almost like checking a box, each one that I'm seeing. I felt like we were going through a lot of the same things. You know, I think when I look back at the year, it was really about reinventing the wheel, so to speak. I mean, there were just so much that didn't anticipate at the beginning of the year. And when we started the year, I think we had so many great objectives and corresponding initiatives that we were looking forward to executing. And, you know, when COVID started, I think there was this kind of mentality that, okay, well, let's readjust a few of these. And then next thing you know, you're kind of readjusting further out. And then next thing you know, I think when COVID started, we were, if you had asked me at the beginning if things in November would have been canceled, and I would have said, oh, absolutely not. We'll be up and running by then. We'll be doing in-person events by then. But that clearly was not the case. And so I think it really was a struggle to kind of reinvent what we wanted to accomplish for the year. I think especially when we looked at our plans for the Corporate Equality Index, we had to really kind of evaluate where we were and to make sure that we were on target to meet and have all the examples and things that we would be able to list when we submitted in the fall. But I think it really was, in a nutshell, just being proactive and figuring out where we could, you know, reinvent things and keep membership engaged.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate both of you sharing from your experience. I paused the screen here on one of the comments I saw, and because I think it's something that we're hearing quite a bit, you know, really frequently, particularly, you know, with the death of George Floyd and, you know, a new urgency for some folks and certainly many businesses to, you know, think about anti-Blackness and how they address that within their business. You know, this idea of, and I'm thinking of this comment kind of on the top of the screen in the middle there, about focusing on specific aspects of diversity and inclusion, so populations or identities, without a comprehensive or cohesive approach. And I'm thinking about this both on two levels. One would be, you know, the organizational level of the company's D&I strategy. But I also think it would be interesting, and Alana, I know you've addressed some of this at Accenture. What about that on the BRG, ERG level? Like, how do you look at breaking down the barriers or silos between identities and populations and having more of, you know, intersectional approach in the work that you're doing? And how do you do that specifically from the lens of the LGBTQ ERG?
It's a big question. I'll try and talk a bit to it, Beck, and thanks for asking. I think we've come a long way, and obviously no one is perfect in this space, and I don't mean to imply that we are either, but I'll at least chat about some of the things that we've been doing last few years as well as the last few months, and then even as recently as now, to give some context. But the way that our ERGs and BRGs are organized is essentially that in the US, we have many local chapters across the cities in which we work that roll up to national teams. And so we have national leads that are responsible for those ERGs across those local chapters. Very typical structure. And so we come together as a community of ERG leads, which is a relatively small group of people, because there's usually 2 to 3 leaders, whether leads or sponsors, per ERG. And we come together on a pretty frequent basis, usually monthly. And so that gives us a forum to really hear peer-to-peer from ERG to ERG what the needs are and what actually is helpful and what's not helpful. Which has given us a lot of opportunity to have events and learning topics over the last few years around intersectionality at large, and say, okay, let's look at a different lens and a different slice of what it means to be queer and Black, or what it means to be bisexual and a woman. And so we've had conversations like that for a couple of years now. And I think what's been different the last few months has really been how we show up as allies and how we talk about allyship for diverse communities outside of the Pride community. And we as a Pride community have had a global ally program, very visible branding around LGBTQ Pride that some of the ERGs have not had in the past. And so we've been able to lend a hand. For example, we're developing an ally program for anti-racism. And so how do you develop an ally program that's meaningful, that actually has some structure to it, that people are contributing and people are learning as they go, not just clicking a box and saying that they're an ally, but rather earning that title. And so we've had a lot of conversations helping in that space. And then the last point I'll add to, back to your point around identity, we've also been exploring this topic in a lot of different ways in the last few weeks, and we have a session coming up actually this coming Friday in Boston that is going across ERGs, where every ERG is talking about the different lenses of identity or potential lenses within their community. So to give an example, the African American ERG is talking about skin color and the gradient of Blackness within the US and what that means to be, how that plays out in the African American community, how your identity could vary within something as broad as saying Black. Or the persons with disability group is talking about different forms of ability and disability. So there's a couple of cool ways to explore what identity means even within communities, within Pride, within our different ERGs, and just talking about that in a very public way. I think for folks that are outside the diversity community, they have little to no context for some of that. They often just bucket like people and diverse people into groups that are easy to wrap brains around, and maybe exploring some of these topics of identity within our diverse communities might open up a few minds.
Wonderful, thank you. In terms of folks, who are just getting started, are, working on perhaps the business case for the CEI within their company, and not only the CEI, but these efforts more broadly read, right? Chad, you've done a lot to champion the Corporate Equality Index at AlixPartners. Can you share a little bit about your process of enrolling leadership and making your business case?
Yeah. So when we started taking a look at the Corporate Equality Index, it was something that was very foreign to our senior leadership. They were not convinced that it was something that we should participate in. They were not convinced that we would do well on it if we participated. And so we took a lot of time to engage the right senior leaders. But as part of that process, we went to great lengths to run through and create a strategy around participating in the Corporate Equality Index. And we actually worked through it to analyze what our score would potentially be before we actually decided to submit and got approval from the different senior leaders within the firm. But it was actually, taking that time to run through it, to really evaluate how we were doing. It's one of the great things about the Corporate Equality Index is how you're able to kind of run through it and really kind of gauge what your potential score is on the fly. And so we were able to go to them, with some pretty, concrete facts about how we would fare if we were to submit. And one of the, I think, interesting things about it was that it really uncovered for us areas that we were already doing really well in, that we might have been surprised to a number of senior leaders. But then it also highlighted for us where we needed work, for sure, and where our shortcomings were. But being able to present that to senior leaders within the firm, to be able to highlight for them exactly where are the positives, what we're doing well, how it would look if we actually did submit, and really where we need to kind of work and shore up things was really kind of what made the whole difference and made it very easy for us to get sign off to participate.
Excellent, thank you. I switched us over to some of our wins, taking a look across the network here, and it's funny to see kind of like moving to virtual as a challenge, but also as a win. But I think that's true for a lot of us, right? Like this was a big challenge, and it's also been an area where we've all learned together and grown together, and have learned to leverage technology in new ways that benefits us in this new environment. Some of the other wins that I see here, and I just want to call them out because I see them kind of across many of the companies that we speak with. One is, considering the pandemic, the toll of the pandemic, the toll of it on our many of us in terms of our actual businesses, perhaps facing budget reductions in force, and so on. There's been throughout that, for many companies, still a commitment to diversity and inclusion, and investment, if not of financial resources, of time resources in the commitment and keeping it forefront. And some folks are even using times like this to do a lot of pro bono work, to engage in more training and education. And all of that is, not only a win for those individual companies, but also for, the movement towards more welcoming workplaces. I see some wins here around integrating ERGs and having multiple ERGs working together in terms of programming and addressing intersectionality. Someone mentions here signing the UN LGBTI standards for business. If you haven't heard of those, there's a great session on those later today at 4:30 today. So check that out on the agenda, and you can learn more about the UN standards. Lots of great stuff coming in here on the feed. Speaking just for a moment about Chad's sharing around the business case and getting started in the CEI, and since we know we have some folks who are new, the process, you can work with our team to do that gap analysis at any time. Even though we have a regular cycle of the CEI, we're happy to reach out and give you the survey to look at in a PDF or Word format, and have time for you to do that back of the napkin calculation on what your score looks like, and we can work with you on what it would take to close that gap. So no need to wait. If you're not in the CEI yet and you want to be, reach out, get into the conversation, get the tools so that we can help you get to that gap assessment and move it forward. Let's take a look here at some of the goals folks have coming in the next 12 months. And just to give some context, these are cross-referenced to SCORE. So the Most of the dark blues there are the dark blue, not the purple, though they're pretty close together. The dark blue are CEI 100s and what CEI 100s are working on. And what I find interesting is, you know, just doesn't matter the score, everyone's kind of working on everything, right? And that is something I think we see a lot with CEI, long-term CEI companies, whether or not they're 100, but if you've been in the dialogue of this work for some time, you're continuously evaluating, refining, improving. It really is a continuous improvement process. For example, if you implemented self-ID a decade ago, you've had to revisit that a few times since then, and you'd want to be revisiting it now. And if you haven't in a little while, in terms of, do you have the right self-identification categories and terms and support around that? So that's just a good example there. Alon, you all are fairly mature in the CEI, but what is Accenture working on going forward in the next 12 months?
It's a good question, and I think you sort of nailed it right there, Beck. We are looking at we do have representation across all 8 of these buckets to some degree, and we're still looking at every single one of them. So we're consistently looking at, for example, our transgender inclusive benefits for benefit equity and making sure that it's leading practice, but also making sure that those benefits are accessible to the people that need them, making sure that they're clear and they're available, they're easy to get, and that folks that are sticking their neck out to go and get benefits that should be available to them are having an easy time doing it. So that's probably relevant across all the benefits categories that are on here. And to your point around self-ID, yes, we do have self-ID. Yes, it is available to most of our employees, and we're still working in a few countries where there are challenges to surveying our people for that sort of data to solve around those challenges as well. But also that we are continuing to encourage people to use the tool and actually self-identify. Accenture made some moves over the past few years to publicly disclose our diversity statistics and demographics. And for the first time this past year, we actually included LGBTQ representation as part of that public disclosure. So it's out there and it's public, and our numbers are not where we believe that they are in reality. And so we're continuing to find easy ways to encourage people to self-identify and make it as easy as possible so that number is representative of our diverse population of LGBTQ people.
Thanks so much. And how about you all over at Alex Partners, Chad? What are you all looking at in the next 12 months?
Yeah, so by far and away, self-ID is probably the biggest area that we're focused on. It's really been something that we've been evaluating over the last couple of years and have really not figured out the best way to implement it. What I will say is that it is, you know, we're definitely making strides to implement it. We've kind of dipped our toe in the water, so to speak, where we've been doing some broader surveys to the firm, kind of collecting or giving people the opportunity to provide this information. And by doing some of these smaller surveys, it actually is allowing us to kind of make the business case for implementing self-ID for those senior leaders that are still not sure about the benefits or why we need to do it. But these smaller surveys are really kind of yielding a lot of important information about the LGBTQ population within the firm. And so I think it's really just a matter of time before we've kind of figured out the best format that makes sense for us as far as collecting this information. But I will say, just looking at the other items that you have listed here, I mean, the Corporate Equality Index definitely served, you know, in years past as a basis for goals that we had, you know, as far as expanding fertility and family benefits as it relates to surrogacy and adoption and fertility treatments. And I think the other one that stands out is the gender transition guidelines. That was a big goal of ours, you know, when we or a big gap when we started the Corporate Equality Index, and was a goal that we actually had for a couple of years to put in place. We released it in the US last year and are actually working on guidelines in EMEA right now.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's another great area that requires revisiting, right? If you created those gender transition guidelines, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago, they probably need a refresh for a couple of reasons. One would be to address any kind of emerging identities that weren't really addressed perhaps in the dialogue 5 years ago, but also just the legal landscape has shifted a little bit. Even if you're just talking about the US, you'd want to make sure that the education that you're doing for managers, for colleagues, that you had the right kind of legal context in there as well. So, many of these areas have a cyclical kind of care and feeding that need to happen, and partly because our community, our own dialogue about who we are, how we express ourselves, what best practice looks like is, continues to evolve and grow. We get a lot of questions at the Human Rights Campaign, and particularly within the Corporate Equality Index, about things like fertility and family formation benefits. So here we're talking about what you would kind of immediately think of around fertility, such as IVF or egg retrieval, things like that, but also surrogacy and the support for surrogacy, adoption and the support for adoption. And so we get a lot of questions about how to expand those, how to do them in a equitable, that they support all families, all couples, single people who want to have kids, and that the benefits are really robust there. The same is true around transition-related benefits. And even a great example there is many plans, even when they have fertility, various fertility coverage, might have a carve out around fertility for transgender people. And so there are things that trans folks may want to do prior to certain medical interventions in order to preserve reproductive options. And so that's a way you could look at the expansion of trans-related benefits in the company. Let's look at the next category on our slides here. And we're going to get to your questions now or soon, but we do want to talk about some of the ideas around new CEI criteria. And Alon just chatted me something really important to think about as well, which is thinking about the current political landscape. And we're not going to go in, we're not going to do the election here, but we're not going to try to parse that. But just thinking about the landscape, and this is, we could say it's the current one or the new one, but it's actually been happening for some time now. As we have certain expansions around the recognition of LGBTQ people under the law, whether it's marriage equality or non-discrimination provisions in the Affordable Care Act that recognize gender identity and sexual orientation, we have also experienced, various legal and legislative backlashes to that, and such that, the non-discrimination provision of the Affordable Care Act is been in the courts pretty much since it came into effect. And it is working its way through the courts. And the challenge, some of the challenge there is around treatment for trans and non-binary individuals. And so we do have a current political or legal landscape where some of the things that in terms of healthcare access and marriage recognition, relationship recognition, are still under challenge. And therefore, what the CEI does and the tool that it is becomes even more important as these things get challenged, maybe outside of the business. What we know at the Human Rights Campaign is that companies, particularly those of you, many of you here work for large self-insured companies, that gives companies a lot of discretion in how they decide they will or won't take care of their employees and their dependents. And the CEI serves as a roadmap for those companies that want to be inclusive to make sure that things like this legal challenge in the outside of business, it doesn't affect their employees, that their employees and their dependents and their families can still have access to that healthcare that they need. So just holding up that we've come a long way as a community, but we still have massive challenges out there and people who want to roll back our rights and access. And the good news is we have many committed employers who know that they can protect against that and make sure that their employees are still covered and protected, and particularly with access to healthcare. Seeing some great ideas for CEI criteria here. We do not have any announced criteria changes for the 2022 CEI. That's the one, not the one we're in right now, but the next one that would be coming up. We do always have some runway into any criteria changes that we make. We give at least one survey cycle where we're asking the questions and explaining the questions, but we're not scoring them. And we use that runway ramp to educate, to help folks close the gap. Our goal would be when we roll out a change, we can help everyone come right along with us in the adoption of that. And the goal there is actually to drive that change rather than kind of just score companies or just protect the score. It's really to actually make those changes get adopted. I see a lot of great ideas here. Thank you for that. So many along the expansion or more comprehensive transgender inclusive benefits. And then some things that are a little more on the culture, education, internal practice side, like diversity mentorship programs, intersectionality, things like that. So thank you so much. We're going to take this as fodder for our conversation and use it to feed what we're doing. You see some things here that are already happening. Public disclosure of LGBTQ plus diversity data. Alon mentioned that Accenture is doing that. Some other large firms are doing that as well, including that disclosure as part of their overall diversity numbers, whether that's in a particular annual diversity or corporate social responsibility report, or as part of the annual report more broadly. So we are starting to see some transparency there, and that's generally a really good thing. We also see this idea here around company engagement with social and political organizations working for equality. We do actually have that as a category in the CEI. It's under the external engagement portion. It is not a required external engagement, but it's an area where things like engaging with Lambda Legal or sponsoring Out and Equal or signing an HRC amicus brief, all of those things would be opportunities for companies to earn credit in that section. But thank you for these ideas. I see some great ideas. Let's go ahead and get to feedback on the process. Alon, I'm going to open it up to you because I know you have some thoughts here, and also appreciate that you are a tech consultant. So that's probably also adds some expertise to your feedback. And I also want to say, to folks out there, we really do welcome your feedback. We take all of it to heart, and don't be afraid. If you don't want to put it up here, send it to us in an email, cei@hrc.org. We do want to make the process better. That is our goal, and so we really welcome that. But Alon, I'll turn it over to you because I know you have some ideas here.
So I have a lot of thoughts on this survey, and most of them are very good. But I'll start with the constructive because I think that's what your question's getting at here, Beck. I think a few things that we've been noticing for areas for opportunity. One of them was actually addressed this year, so I'll start with a thank you. This year there was an option for companies that have had repeat 100 scores to have a shorter version of this survey for recertification, which is something that's common in other diversity studies and surveys as well. So appreciate that opportunity. That was very helpful. And then the bit of constructive feedback I'll give is around the tool itself, right? I think we talked a lot when you were looking at who's on the line here today and seeing some of the different kinds of CEI interactors that are on the phone with us. These surveys usually get chopped up into parts and pieces and spread across an organization to complete and compile. The tool itself, while it's been getting better and better over the years, still does not have an easy export option. So I'm still waiting for that export button that just drops the whole thing into Excel, that lets companies that take those questions and divide them up to fill them out do that a bit easier. Because by and large, while the survey is pretty static, not static in that it's not changing, but the questions types don't change year over year. Sometimes there are subtle differences where the options or the details that you're asking for vary year over year. And so just having an easy option to dump all of that for us to then go fill out would probably be well appreciated, I'm sure, not just by me, but by other folks on the phone too.
Yeah, appreciate that feedback. Definitely, ways to parse the survey, in terms of multiple contributors is something that we've heard more than once. So appreciate that constructive. And I was looking for constructive feedback, but I also will take our little pats on the back where we can get them. I think that this year it was, a goal of ours to find a way for companies that have had a sustained 100 score to have a more streamlined process. Just for those who are new or are still working on attaining that level, this is for companies with 3 or more consecutive years of being at 100%. And it is a more streamlined process, but we also will continue to spot check and check in with companies, even those long-term folks. And, in terms of the rigor of the CEI, we often hear from employees and other constituents who say, my company has 100% or my company has credit for this, and I'm not sure that that's in effect, or I have a challenge to that. And we immediately go back through and look at what we have on file, but also reach out to companies to troubleshoot anything like that. Often we find that there's some breakdown in communication, and that in itself is an opportunity for improvement across the companies. But sometimes we do find that there's conflicting information, and in that case, we would address the score as needed. But I'll tell you a very common challenge, and this might be one of those areas of opportunity for you all to check on. And it's something that an ERG or BRG can do. One is we often find people, they're told what the trans-inclusive benefits are, or they're told what the fertility benefits are. And then when they go to access them, they get some different answer. They get declined, they get, that's not covered, but this is. And, this is a real challenge of kind of the level of service that the healthcare company that's chosen as the administrator of the benefits is providing to the employees. And often it's a disconnect. The company bought this benefit, the employee is trying to access it, and the trouble spot is in the customer service from the third-party administrator. So there are things that can be done to improve that. But the first thing is, like, do you have that kind of problem? And if you're hearing that kind of feedback, or as an ERG, you want to just pressure test it, call up and ask what your benefits are, right? Just call up and ask, because then you're going to be able to kind of, mystery shop how good a service you're getting from the third-party administrator on the benefit itself. Okay, we are at your questions, and we are, please drop them into the Menti, and Raina is taking a look at them over there, as well as if you've got anything in the chat on Pathable, we'll try to keep an eye on that as well. But if you drop it in the Menti, we're sure to see it. And for folks who drop questions, if they're really specific to your survey, we'll take those offline and handle them with you separately. But more broadly, we're going to open it up for big questions here. So let's get with this first one. For companies that have historically not filled out the survey to remain apolitical, how would you approach senior leadership to help move towards this? So I think part of this is that I'm hearing is the business case. How do you make the business case? Sometimes you have employers who say, we don't want to do any diversity surveys. So we're not going to pick whether we do this one and not that one, or this one and not that one. We're just not going to do any. And that is the approach that they take. And maybe that's what you mean here by apolitical. But, fundamentally what this comes down to is a business case and making that for your employer. Certainly, I would start with, the basic tenets of the business case to be a diverse and inclusive employer. So this centers largely around talent, acquisition, retention, engagement. And there's a lot of research out there, including some from HRC that Raina can chat out. And also from McKinsey, from BCG, from Deloitte and others on the business case for being a diverse and inclusive employer. So that's step one, the talent case. I would also say to do your benchmarking. Use the CEI as a tool to look at your peers. Certainly look at your industry peers, but also look at your geographic or like recruitment peers. So who are you competing for talent with in your footprint? And then look at any aspirational peers and companies that you want to be like, and benchmark all of their scores with respect to the CEI. That certainly is part of your case too. Some companies will never be leaders, but they don't necessarily want to be laggards either. And so showing companies that they're in good company with others in the CEI often does a lot to assuage any hesitancy around it. So I'll start there, and I'll invite my guests while we move to the next to pop in any comments they might have as well about making their business case. Chad, what about you?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with your last remarks, especially around the benchmarking. I feel that that's an extremely powerful, metric that resonates with senior leaders when they see what their competitors are doing, what their clients are doing, or potential clients. It has a funny way of changing their mind very, very quickly. So I think that that's a really good thing to demonstrate or to show them. I also think that it's important to show them, just as you mentioned, McKinsey, there's so many great BCG, have so many great articles out there on the importance of really participating in something like this. And then I think that, the Corporate Equality Index has done a really good job around, I don't know if I would call it completely competitive, but it's created a platform and tool that I think when you look out there and how prominent it is, it makes it something that businesses want to participate in. And so I think that competitive nature of it is actually a good thing.
Yeah, thank you for that. We kind of rely on the friendly, competitive nature of corporate America in the Corporate Equality Index, and to really drive the conversation about LGBTQ inclusion forward. And it's really, in terms of the 19-year history of the survey, really shown positive results. So to this question, how many companies had 100 score on last year's survey? That answer is 680. I can't remember.
I believe it's 686.
686. Thank you, Raina.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember if it was 80, 84 or 86. So thank you for that. 686 companies had a 100 score on last year's Corporate Equality Index. We would anticipate that number to grow. It does tend to grow every year. And we know that the number of participating companies will grow in 2021. In 2020, we had 934 actively participating companies, and we will be higher than that this year. So we continue to see that growth and adoption in the survey. What area of the survey represents the greatest opportunities for companies that miss the 100% score? That's actually hard to answer. What companies miss is really kind of all over the place. There are certainly, some defined groups. There are, a group of companies where domestic partner benefits for both same and different sex couples is their loss point. There are a group of companies where transgender inclusive benefits are their challenge area. And then I'd say there tends to be, kind of a smattering across some other areas, whether it's the lack of giving guidelines or, maybe a company has a supplier diversity initiative, but they haven't implemented LGBTQ owned businesses as part of the supplier diversity. So there, that one kind of, there's a little bit of spread there. So outside of the benefits areas, it kind of floats around. What I will say is, we're very good at helping individual companies approach that, their gaps and determine how they can get that closed. Sometimes it helps for us to have a conversation with your leadership. Sometimes it helps for us to connect you to other businesses that have recently solved the same challenge and let you have kind of a peer-to-peer business conversation. Alon has actually helped me with peer-to-peer conversations before, and we have many, many companies that share from their experience one to another that really can help unstick a conversation inside the business. So there are lots of tools that we can bring to help that area. Here's a great question. What's the business case for convincing your employer to make healthcare benefits available to same and different sex partners who choose not to get married to receive spousal benefits? So I will take a first run at this, and I know that Raina also can chat out a link to a document that has this in writing. So let's start with fundamentally part of the business case here is still in talent and talent recruitment engagement. And what I mean by that is, there are many, many people out there who whether they're in a same-sex partnership or a different sex partnership, don't necessarily want to get married, and they may be the talent that you want. And so if you want to attract those people, they still also want domestic partner benefits. They want benefits for their family. They just don't necessarily want to be married. And, you know, one marker of that is the shifting rates of marriage over time and the shifting attitudes towards marriage over time. So as we have a millennial and more importantly, perhaps Gen Z workforce where marriage may not be as important to them, it doesn't mean they don't want to be fairly and equitably compensated, and benefits are part of what they view that fair and equitable compensation to be. So one, the talent argument. The second argument, and probably more to the point of this question, is more why do we require domestic partner benefits in a post-marriage equality world? So we have marriage equality. Why require domestic partner benefits? Well, the reason is that we still don't have uniform civil rights protections in the United States. And when you require people to be married, you are creating, marriage is a public record, it's a public document, and you're essentially creating documentation that can out people as being in same-sex relationships. Because of that, those people may then experience discrimination. So a good example, say we're in Mississippi. I work for a CEI 100 company. I have non-discrimination protections at work. You're not going to fire me for marrying my same-sex partner, or for marrying my same-sex partner. But my partner works at a company that isn't on the CEI and doesn't have a non-discrimination statement. Well, the good news is from the Supreme Court decision this summer, now my partner has protections as well at their place of work. So we both have workplace protections, but now we go home to our rented condo. And our rented condo, our landlord is kind of nosy and picking around in our business, and decides to figure out whether or not we're roommates or something else. And you know, when they find a marriage certificate, we can be evicted for being gay and not have any legal recourse because there are no housing discrimination protections in Mississippi. New York wouldn't be the case. Mississippi would be the case, right? So as we go from state to state, our rights still change, our protections change, and this document that creates exposure is the difference. So while we all can get married, some people, when they get married, face a different set of risks. And that's why we require domestic partner benefits. I hope that helps. If folks want to drop in any follow-ups, that's fine. Or we can take it offline at cei@hrc.org. Any advice for an organization or an ERG that's submitting for the first time and still awaiting your score with anticipation and bated breath, I guess. Raina, do you want to jump in with any advice for folks who are waiting for their score?
Yeah, so first thing is just like, keep an eye out on your email. If we do have any questions about your score or about your submission, we will be reaching out to you either personally from me or from cei@hrc.org. And if you do get that sort of those questions back, just read the email carefully. We try to put as much information about what exactly we need from you or what question we have in that email. And if you do need more clarification or need to set up a call, you can reply directly to that and ask us for more clarification. We're really happy to go more in depth with you there. And then kind of jumping forward from that, a lot of companies then get their score, and want to know, okay, what can we do better next year? So as we get into, maybe January of next year, feel free to reach out to us again and ask for maybe just a rundown or a recap of your CEI participation this year, especially since it's your first time going through it.
Awesome, thank you. Here's a great question. Is there a way for employees to communicate to HRC when they experience that their employer is not being as supportive as their inclusion on the CEI would indicate? Yes, please. Please reach out to us at cei@hrc.org. And additionally, I'll say, there are a couple of things that we can do in that case. So one is to know that the CEI is measuring workplace policies and practices. And so it's not trying to measure the climate per se, but instead the policies and practices and benefits in which an inclusive climate would be built upon. And so one of the things is that, the fact that an employer is being sued for discrimination, for example, perhaps being sued for discrimination by a lesbian employee on the basis of sexual orientation, does not mean that their CEI score is any different. It does mean that they have a challenge in the enforcement of their non-discrimination policy. And first of all, we would hope that when employees are faced with challenges, that they're bringing them forward. They're trying to work through HR or leadership or management or the ethics department or the hotline to get resolution. But if you're not getting resolution and you're being discriminated against or harassed, then you should seek legal guidance in that. What we will do, however, is reach out to the employer. We will, either with your permission to use your name or anonymously investigate what is happening and offer to assist the employer if that's what they need in a better resolution. So for example, we've heard from trans employees who are transitioning and things just maybe aren't going so hot in their work group. There's a lot of misgendering happening and folks are struggling. And the transgender person is having a really horrible time and not being supported. And what we can do is reach out through the diversity and lead HR teams that work on the CEI and say, hey, can we come in and do a training? Can we hook you up with some other trainers? Can we help you help that work team get it together over there, right? And so please do reach out to us. Please do. And we will always respond. We will work with you to the best of our ability. Generally speaking, once a court proceeding has happened, companies won't talk to us, and we can't do much there. That's what your lawyer will be for. But if it's earlier than that, and we can often be helpful in driving towards something. So just want to elevate that, and also point out that if you reach out and say, nope, you gave my employer 100% for this, and this, and they don't have it, it doesn't exist, we will address that with the employer. And if we can't get proof of the standing, we will reduce the score, if not suspend it altogether. So there are ways in which we will adjust and change the score, and we have, and we will continue to do so based on the validity and robustness of the support documentation that they provide us. If a company is going through a spin or a merge process, at what point should the CEI be submitted as the new entities? That's such a great question. And the answer is, it's not a one size fits all, but it's usually at the point at which the benefits have been harmonized. As long as you are individual benefit plans, even if other parts of the entity have merged, we want to measure them separately, or they have to be submitting documentation from both, and they have to have some harmony across those plans, because we wouldn't want to see that, you know, one entity has transient benefits and one, the legacy entity doesn't. It doesn't mean we can give credit for that. It has to be available to all employees. So usually the point at which there's a new CEI is when the benefits have been harmonized. We often have to take this question on a case-by-case basis and work through with you the timeline, the triggers, when things are going to happen, and we're happy to do that. So great question. Let me say that, you know, once the operations are coming together, then the tenets of the CEI have to apply to all employees. So it's not like if, again, let's say you have a 100% company being bought by a company with a score of 50, that company with a score of 50 is not immediately going to go to 100. They're going to have to adopt all those policies and practices that earn that score. So just something to know. What best practices are you seeing for creating talent advancement programs within companies for the career advancement of LGBTQ associates, mentorship, advocacy, et cetera? Well, first of all, I want to invite Alon to tell us a little bit about, if you don't mind, could you tell us about L3 and some of your endeavors at Accenture?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. I think the answer is in the question here too. It is things like mentorship, advocacy, learning programs, and networking, not purely social, but also from a career development standpoint. The program that Beck just mentioned, L3, stands for LGBTQ Leaders Learning, and it's a program that we now run globally. It was born from the U.S. here within Accenture, and that program actually is designed for LGBTQ people and a small selection of our strongest allies as well, to come together on a yearly basis for a learning program around being leaders at Accenture. So the content is not entirely different than you would see at a traditional learning and career development training program. It's really just designed with a specific angle and a bias towards our LGBTQ leaders to lean into the strengths of being part of a diverse community. I'll give an example, right? Accenture has a whole lot of training and organizational energy around talking to our clients in a friendlier way and using storytelling. And our perspective within the Pride ERG has been that our LGBTQ people are uniquely positioned and have a unique skill at doing that. And so we can be leaders on the forefront of a new trend in the industry and things like that. So that program is really designed around making our LGBTQ people more successful in their careers. In addition to that, we have a couple of programs, and these are the ones that are sort of listed here, around advocacy, mentorship. Part of our ERG goals are around ensuring that we have visibility and advocacy at the most senior levels of our organization for LGBTQ inclusion, whether it's from LGBTQ leaders or our allies at the most senior levels of the organization. And there are also a couple of mentorship programs that have different scopes. We have a global Pride mentoring program, as well as a more that's a little bit more open-ended and helps people find each other, and might be more useful for folks that might be looking for very specific alignment, right? If it's someone that's in the same practice within the organization, that's the same gender identity, that's the same level or a level below, right? You might want to widen your search. And then in the US here, we're also running a program that's a little bit more structured around pairing folks up and making sure that they're running through a program that gives them some talking points, activities, things to guide their development, again, to make sure that our diverse people are having an equitable experience at Accenture in terms of career development. So I think those are just a couple of examples, and I'd welcome for folks in the chat. I'm sure there are many other companies that are doing some cool, innovative things in this space, so feel free to just throw them in the chat too.
Yes, please do throw them in the chat, and feel free to jump into any other, use the chat to give some more examples. When I think about this too, I think about self-identification as an important piece of leadership development and pathways. You know, if we aren't doing LGBTQ self-identification, and specifically here within the HRIS system, we may be missing out on opportunities to leverage that diversity in leadership pathways. If you're only relying on who is active in the BRG or an ERG, there, you know, maybe other folks, maybe I am a person with a disability and I'm also LGBTQ, and I put a lot of my energy into the disability ERG and not as much into the LGBTQ ERG. And, you know, without having that self-ID, I might not be able to identify that person as someone for that leadership opportunity. So something to think of there. 700 out of 900 participating, score 100. Does this mean no work is needed? The company is already there. If yes, it seems disproportionately high. Do we have enough rigor? What a great question. I love this question. First of all, a little earlier, you saw a question asking about how many companies scored a perfect 100. And I'll tell you that we actually avoid the word perfect. They scored a 100 and nobody's perfect at this work. And the minute we start thinking we're perfect at this work, we've got a lot more work to do. And so one of the things that we like to say about the CEI, and I alluded to this too when I was talking about what it measures, right? It measures policies and practices. It doesn't measure how well those policies and practices are actually being leveraged and utilized. It's so much harder to, quite honestly, fairly and actively assess that across companies. We hope that companies, first of all, are doing their own climate surveys and engagement work to see how well they are doing at bringing the policies and practices to life. And then we are always working with companies to go beyond 100. And, you know, I think a great example is, you know, the original, you know, we have a handful of companies, 13 that scored 100 19 years ago on the first CEI and have scored 100 ever since. And we work with those companies year in and year out. You know, it's not like they've left our as a matter of fact, we're probably in more dialogue with some of the long-term 100s than we are with companies who score sufficiently lower. And what that tells me is companies kind of really get it. Getting to 100 is actually like kind of the beginning of the conversation. And I see Chad shaking his head. Chad, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add, I think, you know, as you go through the CEI, there's inevitably questions, even if you do get a perfect score, that you're not answering yes or providing information for. And so I think there inevitably are a number of areas on the CEI, even if you do get a perfect score, that still require work. I think it's especially important to go back and look at the questions that you did answer no, or maybe the questions that are not scored. And keep an eye on those and look at ways that you can move the needle year after year. In fact, I think for us, some of those no questions or questions that have not been scored have kind of led to some of our bigger initiatives, just because we, you know, as the CEI evolves, some of those, the questions that aren't currently scored, they may down the road be scored at some point. And so we want to make sure that if it ever did get to that point, that we're kind of ready. So that's probably a long way of saying I do think that there's a lot of rigor in there, and I think there is a lot of room to continue working.
Thank you so much, Chad. And to the point earlier of the question about what criteria you would like to see in the future, we are currently on the fifth set of criteria. So it's changed 4 times in the history of the CEI. It will change again. And part of that change is about that kind of growth and stretch and driving the adoption of new practices. So while we don't have announced criteria changes at this time, because I know you all are going to ask me what's changing, while we don't have those announced criteria changes at this time, know that it will change because it will, it's a tool to continue to drive the conversation forward. And we really appreciate everyone who participates in the CEI, whether they have a 40 or 100. Our goal is to meet you where you are and to continue the conversation and work on how we make it real every day for LGBTQ people. And we know that that's what our companies are committed to as well. And so, whether or not, you're at 100 is really only part of the story. And that's why we're engaged every day with so many of those companies. Just a reminder to give us questions at CEI@hrc.org. We're coming up on the end of our session, and we wanted to end on a positive note and hear some of the success stories. I've got them like rolling up on the screen, but I also want to invite Chad and Alon to tell us a little bit about their experience or success from this year. Just anything you'd like to share.
Yeah, so I'll jump in and tackle. I think that, for us, when I look back at just our history of participating with the CEI, and we just submitted, this is our 4th year, it really amazes me at how much the CEI has served as a framework, not just for our Pride ERG, but I think for some other D&I initiatives across the firm. So just to see the impact that it's had, not just for our Pride ERG, but for the broader firm, I think has been our biggest success story. And then I think, I just elaborated on this just a couple minutes ago, but I think, focusing on those areas where we answered no, or we're not, we didn't have an answer for it, to making sure that we're incorporating those in our initiatives for the year is important. And I think that because we did focus on those, it's been very helpful to us.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll add as well is not from the last year, but I'll stretch back a little bit back to some of the major changes in the CEI that you just mentioned. I think that stretch goal and that movement of the CEI has given us a goal to ensure that we're offering the most competitive and best benefits for LGBTQ people. And so I think those changes are a good thing, and I think we should all be looking forward to them. And a small thank you to the HRC for actually putting them into a survey that we get measured against, because to the whole last hour and a half's worth of conversation, that is a large part of the business case for many of us to get those benefits for our people. And so I welcome the change and thank the HRC for making those changes available and making this group of folks, myself and all of the other attendees, aware of those changes that are coming, because it gives us something to then go do. And so we look forward to the next round of revisions, whenever they may be, and you don't have to tell us what they are or when they will be, Raina or Beck.
Thank you. How about you, Raina? Do you want to share something from your desk?
Yeah, so this is a little inside baseball, or kind of meta, I guess. But this year, I was able to work on our project with our team to put out a relatively comprehensive webinar series about our criteria, and it's something that I have been wanting to do. And it just goes over each section and explains the criteria and why we have it and the history behind it. And it was great to talk to folks throughout that series and really hear from all of y'all. My favorite part of the CEI is being able to talk to all the participants. So it was a really great win for me. And just shameless plug, I did put that in the chat on Pathable if you all are interested in that, especially the newcomers here. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Raina. Well, for me, it's really kind of hard to pick. I hear so many great stories. You know, at least once a week, I hear an amazing story about change at a company. Some of it driven by the CEI, some of it driven just by passionate advocates like everyone who's on the line with us today. I'll tell you, I heard recently of a company that had some challenges around their trans benefits for a long time, and they you know had wanted to be inclusive, I think, and their intention was, but they had some real barriers around the access to that coverage. And what I mean is things like they just couldn't get over the hump of offering hormone blockers for trans youth within their plan. And I recently heard from a parent who said, you know, I'm just really thankful for the work of HRC to educate my company to remove that barrier so that I could take care of my kid. And, you know, the kids always get me. It probably gets at the heartstrings for a lot of us. But the idea also that the CEI extends beyond employees, but to our families and the dependents that are on these benefits and plans. And, you know, for a lot of folks that can make such an amazing difference. And I love seeing in the chat that people like chose their place to work based on the CEI. That's the business case of the CEI right there, and love to see that. So thank you for affirming the work that we do. I want to say that we are going to wrap it up. We're at the end here, but we can hang out for a moment or two, no pressure though. But I do want to take a moment to thank our guests, Alon and Chad, for coming and sharing with us from their personal experience of the CEI and their work as champions within their companies. So thank you, Chad. Thank you, Alon, so much. You know, I really appreciated the opportunity for you to role model some of this change. So thank you.
Thanks for having us back.
And literally to everyone on the line, the CEI would not exist without you and your efforts. We know that it is a robust process that takes a lot of time and commitment and requires you to learn things about benefits you probably never wanted to learn. That's okay. We really, really appreciate the time and energy that you put into it. We could not do this work without you. So to all of you on the line, thank you, thank you. Please reach out to us, CEI@hrc.org. To my colleague, Raina, thank you so much. And we'll see you around the summit over the course of the week. Have a great day.